When we got the call saying someone found a leopard gecko in their backyard, I was a bit skeptical at first. A leopard gecko outside in Montana? But that's exactly what they had found. And from what they told me on the phone, I knew the gecko needed help right away. But I wasn't prepared for how bad it was until I saw him. This is what he looked like when I first saw him, and within 15 minutes, the time it took to drive there, he was getting a full examination from our vet. Leopard geckos are a common lizard to be kept as a pet, but they're native to specific environments in the Middle East, not to the extreme temperatures and dryness of a Montana summer. When his rescuers first found him in their yard, they brought him into the safety of their home, and then they set about trying to find his owners. But no one in their neighborhood or the surrounding areas claimed the leopard gecko. So we don't know how long this guy was outside, and we also don't know the reason he was outside. He could have escaped accidentally, or he could have been intentionally released. And just to be sure we're clear on this point, it's never okay to release a pet into the wild. Animals that are pets are not going to do well in the wild for many reasons. For example, they don't live in the environment you're releasing them into, or they have no survival skills and won't know how to evade predators or find food, or they don't have the proper camouflage to hide effectively, or they might have a specific parasite that they've picked up from store-bought food, and when you're releasing them, you're spreading that parasite into the wild population. Now, we don't know that he was intentionally released, but we do know that he couldn't have been outside for longer than 3 to 4 months because it would have been too cold for him to survive earlier than that. But he was definitely struggling for quite some time, and he most likely was experiencing some neglect for far longer than just a few months. With our vet, the first thing we checked for was if he had any serious infections or wounds that would need serious intervention. But he had so much inflammation and crusty buildup that it was hard to get a good look. So we gave him a soak in warm water and worked on getting some of the stuck-on bits off. He had retained shed all over his body. Retained shed means that the old scales that naturally come off every couple months don't come off and stay stuck on. Unlike many lizards who will rub their old scales off, leopard geckos will actually pull it off themselves with their mouth and then eat it because it's full of good nutrients. If the old layers of scales aren't able to come off completely during a shed, then it can cause issues the next time they shed, which can cause layer after layer to build up. This is what we were thinking happened here with this leopard gecko, most likely due to not being able to find a damp and humid area to crawl into. Being outside in an unsuitable environment made it impossible for him to get his basic needs met. Now, with the severity of the retained shed, the major areas of most concern were his eyes, mouth, and cloaca. The cloaca is also sometimes called a vent, and it's their everything hole for elimination and reproduction. If the cloaca gets clogged up, they won't be able to pee and poop, and it can be life-threatening. So the warm water that we placed him in allowed some of the scales on his back and his toes to come off easily. And we were also able to get the large buildup near his cloaca softened up. We removed some of the crust stuck to the outside of his mouth, and we were able to see inside, which thankfully looked healthy. His eyes were the most concerning. He couldn't open them at all, and we couldn't determine if they were even still functional. And the last concerning part was his toes. Most of them were either already missing the nails or they had so much built up shed that they were constricted and dying. There was also quite a bit of inflammation, but no serious infections. For treatment, Dr. Card gave him an injection of antibiotics and prescribed antibiotic drops for his nose and antibiotic ointment for his eyes, mouth, and toes. When we got him back to Animal Wonders, we set him up in a sterile quarantine space. This was to prevent any substrate from getting into the sores we would be treating over the next few weeks. His space included paper towels for the bottom, a humid hide using moistened paper towel pieces, a dry hide, a shallow water dish, and a gentle heat source. After another good soak, the gecko, who we nicknamed Leo, was able to shed off a layer of old scales on his face and head. Underneath the shed that came off his eyes was disconcerting. A good amount of built-up pus was covering his eyes, making it impossible to know if he would ever be able to see again. However, Leo was active and seemed relieved to finally get all the stuck shed off his mouth. He licked his mouth and nose repeatedly, doing his best to help us out. Over the next few days, we gently applied antibiotic ointment and drops to his affected areas and gave him daily soaks. We also changed his paper towels twice a day to prevent any secondary infections. And during this time, he lost a few more tips to his toes that had already lost blood supply and had died. But we were thrilled to see that his cloaca and femoral pores were healing well and already looked much better. They were still inflamed, and it looked like he had a small infection on the right side of his cloaca. If left untreated, or if he wasn't in a sterile setup, things would likely have gone downhill quickly. But we treated that with antibiotic ointment twice a day, and he kept making progress. Now, this part is kind of gross, so you can skip ahead 10 seconds if you don't want to see it. The pus that had been covering his eyes had dried a bit and came off when I was applying ointment. It was hard to see clearly, but it looked like maybe he had eyes that just needed some more time to heal. So I was hopeful. A few days later, I came in to see that he had another layer of skin ready to shed. That was 3 layers. He must have been so uncomfortable. This shed was also over his eyes, so we applied a thick layer of ointment to make sure it was soft enough to easily come off. We waited several days for him to remove the shed himself, but either he was too weak or his mouth was too sore, and he didn't pull it off himself. In normal circumstances, you should not pull on a leopard gecko's shed, since having it come off too soon can cause damage to the new skin underneath. In this case, the shed was ready to come off, and it was mostly separated from his body. But he wasn't pulling it off himself, so I gently helped it off of his face. When I got to his eyes, he enthusiastically helped with a jerk. I quickly applied ointment to his sensitive eyes and mouth, and when I set him down in a shallow tub of water, he started drinking. While he had been active the whole time, he had always turned away from offered food and his dish of water. So it was so good to see him finally feeling good enough to drink. Now there's no way that I can know what he's feeling, but in that moment, it sure looked a lot like relief. The next goal was getting him to eat. A couple weeks of treatment later, and his mouth and cloaca were looking so much better. He still had some sores that had been under all the crusty buildup, but they were healing well. He was more active in his enclosure, and every once in a while he would open his eyelids a little, and we could spot his gorgeous hazel eyes looking out. They were a bit cloudy, and he still kept them closed most of the time. But again, there was hope that his eyes would recover. And just 3 weeks after his rescue, Leo ate his first meal. It was a small, soft waxworm, and the next day, he ate 2 more. He smelled them, then peeked his eye open just a tiny bit to see what it was, and gently gobbled them down. Now that he was eating, we knew he was going to make it, and we could start preparing him for his new home. Animal Wonders is currently completely full, and we don't have the space to house another leopard gecko. His small sterile quarantine setup is a lot smaller than what he will need once he's completely healthy. We've gotten quite attached to him in the short time he's been with us, so we were really happy when Taylor, our very own team member, said that she'd be happy to adopt him. This way, we can check in and visit with him once he's moved out. Taylor knows how to take care of him well, and will be able to help him if he doesn't regain full use of his eyes and needs specialized care. His new name is Pascal, and I'm excited to see how much he enjoys his new home. Can you believe Pascal went from this to this in just 4 weeks? Leopard geckos are very hardy reptiles, but they do need specific care with proper heating, lighting, humidity, substrate, and diet. If you think you want a leopard gecko as a pet, please take the time to research their care extensively so you know what you're going to be responsible for. They can live over 20 years, so while they're one of the easier reptiles to care for, they still have plenty of needs and continued commitment for quite a long time. I want to thank all of our incredible donors who help make rescues like this possible. Your support gives us the ability to provide medical care, housing, and dedicated time to those animals that need it the most. If you'd like to help too, I've put a link in the description for where you can donate. And thank you to our patrons on Patreon for helping us make videos like this. We love sharing the animals, our experiences, and our knowledge with others. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed getting to see Pascal make such an amazing recovery, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.